Good evening, everybody, and welcome back for our sixth episode of Talking TSR. I'm your host, Chris, and to my virtual right or left is
Rick Maffei,
Rick.
how are you folks?
Yes. So we're only doing this show every 3 weeks, but here we are again. And this will be a quite interesting one too, as I was already mentioning to my co-host, how we're going up against NFL football. So I expect a big downtick in the attendance of folks watching this tonight. Although to be honest with you, yeah, we probably don't have a very high crossover between the old school gamer and NFL football. So maybe we won't. We'll have to
We'll
see.
see.
So
We'll see. What's
yes, Rick,
football?
how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Um, a lot of things going on, a lot of plates spinning at the same time. I'm finally getting that end of summer feeling. I
Mm,
think for quite a while it didn't feel like summer, because of the pandemic and what have you. I was sort of trapped in an April mindset, I think months after April, but now it's really kicking in. The back to school vibe is hitting and everything's going on, and
oh
my
yeah.
my work is getting busy, and lots of things going on, but busy is good. So, how are you
Yeah.
doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. Yes, busy as well too. And I would agree that yes, it was a end of summer and definitely a strange kind of summer. Like you said, didn't really feel like summer. But then again, things aren't really things kind of blending all together and kind of feeling very samey. So, but
Yeah.
it is what it is. I think we're kind of settled into a routine at this point now, and I think it's all good. And we've got an exciting show for you
Yeah.
guys that we are going to talk monsters today. And then when we talk monsters, we're talking first edition monsters. So we're bringing it all the way back. We decided that monsters is a topic that's near and dear to both of our hearts. And we know most old school gamers, especially game masters, really love monsters. There's nothing like flipping through the latest, greatest monster book. So we're going to focus today on the first edition Monster Manual, and we're going to dive into a bunch of different things on, including a top list, a top 10 list. We haven't done a top 10 list in a while.
Yeah.
But I will kick it off with, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it, Rick. I'm going to
Yeah.
say, what is your favorite first edition
Oh,
excuse me, monster.
monster. And that, yeah, module would have been easier. Um, uh, like I was starting to say, as the topic was raised just before we went on the air, I've got lots of favorites, but pinning down a particular favorite is is really hard. I like certain dragon types, so I'm a big fan of black dragons. I think black dragons are
Mm.
also cool. I'm also a fan of the Lucrata and
Oh,
one
wow.
or two
Did
other
not know
things
that.
that might crop up on my list. That there's some crossover into my top 10 list, though my top 10 list is not strictly what I personally like per se. But yeah, I think that would be. I think for weird reasons, I dig the Lacrata. I dig Black Dragons, even though I don't get to use them as much as I'd like. And I like Hydras. I think the whole idea of
Mm.
especially the Linnarian type Hydra, or the type of where you slice off one head and you get two. I think that's a fabulous image. It brings back that whole Ray Bradbury stop motion animation movie kind of feel when the
Yes.
players are fighting Hydra and heads are all over the place and biting and snapping at them and that kind of thing. Uh, Very cinematic for me. So, like, what do you think your favorite monster would be? Straight out favorite.
Um, yeah, actually, from that strange and odd book, The Fiend Folio, they made an appearance in a very famous module. I think the Kuatoa are
Ooh,
probably, yeah. I mean, I was thinking about it. There's a lot going on with them as a humanoid. I mean, first of all, they're in the Underdark, which is good. They're fish dudes. I love fish. I used to be an aquatic biologist, so that checks off that box.
yeah.
It was cool. They used to have like sticky goo on their shields, so
Mhm.
your weapons would get stuck to them. They used nets. They used the man catchers, the pincher staffs, and everything. So they had
Yeah.
some crazy weapons. They had a lot of clerics, a lot of cleric assassins, which were their whips. They had their monks, the monitors, and then they had like the princes and everything, and which were like really high level. So they kind of had a lot of everything,
Yeah.
and I like that. I liked it that you could run through an entire lair or shrine, shall we say, of them, and each encounter is going to have a little bit of a different feel to it because of all those different weapons and items and tactics and class abilities, if you will. So So yeah, I think that was the one that probably comes to me as far as one of my more favorite ones.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent pick actually, because and I'm sure we'll talk about the Descent series at some point down the line, but certainly D2, if I remember right, Gygax goes into great detail on them, on the
Yeah,
race, and they really felt like a race because he did say, he did talk about the monitors and the structure and some of the things, and like you said, they have a whole plethora of abilities.
yes,
I remember that at least original. I don't know. The Fiend Folio might have slimmed it down a bit. I'm sure they did, but the original module write up of the Kotoa was really long. Like it gave
yeah.
them all
It was
kinds of
like,
binocular vision and, like you said,
yeah,
special shields and nets, and it was very cool. Like there was so much there and all these different things they were immune to, and I remember it was fairly complex. For just kind of a race of bipedal humanoids, there was a lot going on there. So yeah, a lot of beef
yeah.
there. Uh,
Oh yeah, yeah. I think D2, I think might have been 16 or 18 pages long, maybe 20, and I think it was 2 pages were for the
yeah,
monster write up of everything. So between all, like you said, the structure of their whole culture and everything. So yeah, definitely. So yeah, that was one I think I probably, again, I would be something that I probably have a couple of others also. But
mhm.
and I will, of the chromatic dragons, I would probably agree with you. I kind of like black dragons. I like them because they were not as iconic as the red dragons, swamps,
Mhm.
which is dismal. And, you can see a dragon living in a swamp kind of thing. And, and much more common than running into like a white dragon and everything. But yeah, I definitely had a good vibe about black dragons as well. So,
Yeah, they've become a favorite, and especially I think as certain artists started putting their stamp,
yeah,
um, within the world of D&D art. After, I mean, I think the Red Dragon was established kind of early, and certain frills and things were established a little
yeah,
bit. You look at the White
yeah,
Dragon, but later on, the Black Dragon in particular really started getting like a sort of almost like a skull-like look with sunken eye
yep,
socket, and sort of very and horns, and they started always depicting it with horns and this kind of skull-like visage, and they really, we've gotten to a point now where I think if you've played D&D through several editions, kind of what the little look of each dragon is, even the sort of facial look of them. And the
yeah,
facial characteristics, the environment, the acid breath is of course wonderful. uh
yeah, yeah,
Love them.
yeah. Nice, excellent. All right, well let's jump into talking some monsters then.
Yeah. um all right, so yeah, tonight we're sticking to the Monster Manual, first edition. So we're gonna focus in on that book. And yeah, I remember running into the book. First of all, I remember my first impression of it just being blown away, because I was, younger. I hadn't had a lot of experience with D&D. I encountered the original Monster Manual. It was the first D&D hardcover book I got my hands on, and I really had barely been playing the basic set when I got that book. I kind of almost stumbled into one after the other within months, I think, of each other. So I remember seeing all the monsters stretching all around that wraparound cover, and it
Hmm.
just kind of blew me away. And it's funny. I think people now, they're so used to these standalone monster books that it's an interesting concept, because it's not really an obvious thing. You could have easily just buried a monster chapter or monsters within a DM's book or something, but the idea of a standalone monster book, it's got, I think, great utility to have one creature or one or two creatures on a page, almost always with a picture. And just, it's, for me, it's great inspiration for a DM to just go, or at least certainly for me, to go flipping through the book and just literally look at the pages and look at the creatures and just let ideas come to mind. I've done that many a time. My ideas for adventures have started by flipping through the Monster Manuals. So
Yeah. Oh yeah. Same here.
great
Same here.
memory there,
And yeah, and I agree. I think it was the first Advanced Dungeons and Dragons hardcover that I owned. I remember seeing. I don't think the Dungeon Master's Guide was out at that point when I was getting. No, they must have been. Come to think of it, but I remember I had a choice of one book, and I
Mhm.
looked at the three titles that I had, and I was like, oh, I definitely want the monster book first. It's like I don't need to know the rules of the game. I probably should have, but but back then we kind of played our own cobbled version of the rules of the game. But you definitely need 300 plus monsters. I
Yeah.
mean, without a doubt. And that was definitely on the top of my list of things to do. So what would you when you're thinking about a monster book,
Mhm.
what would you put the precedence on for what's a good monster book versus not? not so good monster book.
All right. For good, I mean, without going too deep into the boring part, which would be layout and etc. Obviously, inspiring art is good. Not too many creatures, spacing the creature out, one or two a page. Again, kind of giving me a book I can flip through and be inspired by is good. Because art does make a difference. Like you were saying about the Koatoa, if you look at the original, to me anyway, again, strictly my opinion, if you look at the original module illustration of these fishmen and then you look at the Fiend Folio version, one really inspires me and one doesn't. So art does matter. But going beyond that, I guess just interesting creatures that still bear some verisimilitude is important for me, not creatures that are such weirdities or so far out there that I can't believe them. And certainly in the first edition monster manual, there are some creatures that are pretty bizarre. Like the Thought Eater, for instance, or something like that. You look at it, it's definitely very alien and bizarre. And yet somehow they still manage to be plausibly realistic, as realistic as you can get, within a game of giant flying lizards that breathe fire. So yeah, I guess that's part of it for me, is I want to see creatures that are inspiring, cool, have interesting abilities, and yet don't seem like made up, that seem like they could physically be walking around. That's my element. Like, what would you say constitutes a good?
So I agree. Artwork is exceptionally important, and in this day and age, obviously, color artwork is paramount. Obviously, we didn't have that luxury back in the day, but definitely artwork that give you a feel. I've noticed that in doing my research for this episode, there were a decent number of monsters in that first edition book that didn't have artwork for whatever reason. And I don't think those were memorable, and I don't think those were used very often. And I think that's part of the reason you didn't have that good picture in your mind. I mean, try to describe a rust monster to somebody that's never seen a rust monster before. And they probably don't come up with what it really looks like. So so I think the artwork is there. And I always loved the ecology sections of the books, which again, some of that stuff didn't come until second edition, where they really started breathing life into some of these cultures for the humanoid creatures, but also some about what does the creature normally eat, where does it normally live, so I was always fascinated with that. And then the last thing that I was always fascinated with was some of the creative treasure that they could have, or the valuable body parts or whatever. I mean, who hasn't collected the blood of a hellhound because, oh, I bet you we can make a potion of fire resistance off of this, right, or something, or something along those lines. I mean, it can get a little bit, you can go a little too far. I think when we were younger, we turned into every kill that we had, we were trying to collect something, glands or eyeballs or something to see if we could sell it or whatever. But sometimes it was really cool to actually have some of that in there, like, this monster prefers gems, or I think was it green dragons prefer emeralds, I think it is, and black dragons prefer black gems, black sapphires, or whatever it was. But opals, but it was like, but that was kind of cool. That just gave you that little something extra to kind of use, and I found that to be very inspiring. And like you said, I've also been inspired by it. Sometimes when I'm okay, I'm creating a module, I know what the big baddie is going to be, I know what most of the encounters going to be, but I don't have that feel for all of the encounters. Sometimes just that flip through a monster manual, and then it all kind of comes together after a while.
Yeah, I agree. It's important.
So all right, so let's talk about the toy inspired monsters.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the fabled toys. As legend holds it, though there does seem to be truth and plausibility to the legend. Gygax did inspire several creatures, were inspired by small plastic toys, and among them were the owlbear, the boulet, the rust monster, and there's probably several others that I'm not, maybe the carrion crawler. I think there's 5 or 6 of them, and I'm probably not remembering all of them. So if anybody remembers them can comment, please chime in. But I know certainly the boulet, the owlbear, and the rust monster were supposedly inspired by it. And I actually have a rust monster, a toy rust monster that I found, and it was found evidently the way Gygax found his, and that I bought a bag of little plastic monsters that had snakes and spiders and just, you know, assorted little junk in it. And I found the rust monster inside it. And I've had this little rust monster tied to my dice bag. If you look at the photo, you can see a penny for size. So he's not terribly big. He's about as big as, you know, half your index finger. But yeah, I'm quite attached to him because I've never seen him anywhere else. So I don't know how it was pure happenstance, but I seem to have blundered into perhaps the same toy that inspired the rust monster. So I'm
That's
happy to
very
have
good.
him. And I have run into at least one other person on the Paizo boards who also has a similar rust monster to mine, virtually identical, except the coloration is different. So somebody in some faraway factory, you know, swabbed him with a different color paint, but otherwise this fellow's got the same plastic creature. So, and
Wow.
I haven't seen any of the others. I haven't seen, except in books, you know, about D&D. I haven't actually encountered people that have a boule or an owlbear or anything like that, and I don't. The bag I got just had the rust monster, so that's
Wow.
a little
That
story.
makes you wonder what that little thing's worth.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, it's funny because a great many of the monsters, you know, as we know in the monster manual, did come directly from mythology. Even a lot of
Hmm.
creatures that people don't, maybe aren't aware. You know, people know, oh yeah, the griffin came from, but even things like the sturge came from like Italian mythology. So there's a lot of creatures there that seem made up that actually have some kind of basis or loose basis in mythology. But yeah, evidently when it comes to the owlbear and you know the boule and a couple things, supposedly Gygax just ran into the toys and went with it. So you know, it's good he didn't run into a bag of Godzilla toys, I guess. But I always thought the story was interesting. And then when I, like I said, when I ran into my own rust monster, now he's become like a treasured little item. So, and again, if anybody is watching and knows of one or owns one, yeah, let us know because I'd love to see a picture of somebody else's rust monster or boule. So
Very
yeah,
good.
that's the kind of the story there. So I'd like to hear at some point firmly whether it's true or not. But I've heard it so many times that it's starting to bear some semblance of truth. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
always thought that
good.
was a cool, you know,
Yes.
story.
Fascinating little piece of old gaming lore. You know,
Yeah,
urban legend or
I don't
true
know.
or maybe both.
Yeah, I'll throw out a little legend with the truth. You know,
Yeah, exactly. Embellish it a little bit because that's what
that's right.
storytelling's all about. And ultimately, aren't we game masters and aren't we just
That's
embellishing
it.
stories? So
So I'll let the audience evaluate as they may, but I do have my little plastic fellow for proof. So
awesome. Excellent. All
now
right.
we were going to talk about encounters too, right?
Yeah, let's
We
get
talk
to it.
about what makes before we
So,
start getting into our top 10, right? We're going to talk about what we feel helps make a good encounter or, you know, goes there. So I don't know, when we want to, well, do you want to kick off or do you want me to kick off? What do we talk about that?
yeah, let's so I think when you're developing an encounter, there's a bunch of different ways you can approach it. Obviously, if you know what monster you're going to feature ahead of time, you can use that as your guiding thing because obviously certain monsters are going to lend themselves to certain tactics
Mhm.
better than others, obviously. So it's really, it comes down, in my opinion, it comes down, you got a couple of pieces to a good encounter design that features a monster. We're not talking about
Mhm.
puzzles or traps. It's the monster itself, obviously. It's the tactics, and then putting a spin on those tactics to maybe enhance them somehow. And then I think a really big part, and I think a lot of people miss this, especially some of the younger game masters that are probably just out there creating their first adventures and stories, is environment. I think environment is crucial in how you can work the environment in with the monster and or the tactics all together. And once you start doing that and really start having them play off of each other, I think you can get for some really fabulous encounters. So yeah, so do you have an example
I,
that you want to talk about?
yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly. I was going to mention environment. Because if you think of real life creatures, real life animals, insects, you think of, you know, snakes, frogs, how much they use the environment to their, you know, how spiders that live near water, you know, behave differently than spiders that, you know, live in trees and this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
creatures are influenced by their environment, and certainly you in the natural world they use it to their advantage. And yeah, like I've tried to utilize environment in my campaigns to make things interesting. I one thing that comes to mind very recently, and it was literally like a wandering monster type encounter, but uh, had yet another rest situation where the party beds down for the night and everybody's getting their long rest, and the characters, I think there was 4 characters, so they said, well, we'll take shifts and we'll go on guard, and it was, I think every DM's run into that. And I happened to roll up some sort of giant encounter. It was either an ogre or an Etin or something along those lines. And the characters were camped out in an old lean-to, and it was teeming rain, and they were in this kind of old shaky lean-to at the top of a hill, and the rain was teeming down, and the characters had all bundled themselves inside this old lean-to. So they ended up, encountering this Etin. And rather than have the Etin simply walk up to them and maybe, beat them over the head with his club, the Etin, not being terribly intelligent, kind of ended up hurling himself into the lean-to. And then because there's raining and, mud and rain is teeming down this hill, the weight of the Etin basically inside the lean-to caused the whole lean-to to tumble down the hill. So now all of a sudden there's a situation where this ramshackle wooden lean-to is careening down the hill like a toboggan with the characters and the Etin all inside. And I had a lot of fun with that. And I think the players did too, because now instead of a straight out encounter, broad daylight of, the characters versus the Etin toe to toe, now you've got this very chaotic situation. You had characters having to make decisions. Were they going to leap out? Were they going to stay in this runaway vehicle? Where are they going to fight the Etin when they're being tumbled around on top of each other? And are they going to try to wrestle him or throw him out, or what are they going to do? And all of a sudden, a lot of decisions, presented themselves. And I feel like if you make the player's mind start racing as to the possibilities, it's good. Another older example, I'll give you one more, and I'll try not to go on too long about it. The characters were assaulting a ruined tower that was full of Kenku. So you have these sort of Kenku and thieves and assassin types in this ruined tower, and rather again than have a toe-to-toe encounter with the Kenku, the characters ended up fighting them on these planks and this sort of ruined flooring. So the flooring was incomplete on the various levels, and I threw something together just with literally pieces of styrofoam and little boxes and things that were at hand. But the players later told me, a couple of them, that they really enjoyed the encounter, and I have the picture here to show, because one of the players actually just snapped the picture because they wanted to keep it for their own memory, and they were good enough to share the picture with me before the show. So yeah, that encounter involved a lot of precarious plank crawling with these very agile Kenku, and grappling hooks being shot and missiles being shot from higher levels, and the Kenku using their missile attacks and that kind of thing, and it worked out well. So I think that's fantastic advice, especially for any like newer DM, to absolutely think about your environment, get inspired and make it work with you, with your creature. What about you? Can you throw an example? I'm sure you've got probably many.
Yeah, lots of them. It was actually kind of hard to kind of come out with just a couple of them, but yeah. So there was then Dungeon Magazine. There was a side trek, which was basically like one encounter, not a full-fledged module. But it was set in the Underdark, and it was basically, the passage opens up and it's a chasm, if you will, and there's a rope bridge. You can never go wrong with a rope bridge.
Wow.
You throw a bridge. So you could have an encounter with orcs in a room, and that's about it. But you throw in a rope bridge, which is precarious and stuff, and then you take the orcs and you have them swinging on ropes back and forth across like where the rope bridge is, so, and leading with spears. So now all of a sudden that's a charge attack. And then you can also throw some comedy in there. That first attack goes really well, but then after that they don't really go very well. Now you give the characters an opportunity. If you have a sword, you can just cut the rope and send the orc down into the chasm. So that was always good. And then just to turn it up to 11 a little bit, you put some water at the bottom of the chasm, and then you throw like a giant turtle in down there, and just just make it a little bit over the top, and and basically the orcs try to knock you off the bridge, try to get you down in there, and then the turtle messes you up, and then they at their leisure they go and recover you and all your loot and everything. So but yeah, that's just an example of taking a normal encounter of it could have just been a 60-foot wide cavern with orcs and spears. Instead you got some elevation going on there. You've got a couple of different types of attacks. You've got, like you said, different opportunities for people to do things. Might not always be a great idea to grab that chandelier and swing on it, but put it there anyway,
right.
Just in case. And that's another thing too. I mean, I faced it when we were creating tournaments. We were always so careful of like what magic items we gave the characters, because we didn't want a magic item that was going to ruin a particular encounter. So, case in point, slippers of spider climb. You can circumvent a lot of things by just not touching the floor or going around or running across the ceiling. But at the other hand, too, when you give your characters slippers of spider climb, for example, it gives them another opportunity to get in trouble, quite frankly. They think, oh, I'm going to go do this now, and I'm just going to run across that ceiling, and then, okay, well, there's a giant spider up at that ceiling, and now you're the only one up there because you're the only one that can spider climb, and now you're in a world of trouble. So it's like, so give them the tools, give them the opportunity, lay the stage, like you said, with the lean-to. It's a dynamic environment. And you're giving them options: jump off, stay on, grapple. Maybe they wouldn't normally consider grappling, but now maybe grappling is a much better idea than swinging with a sword. Maybe they drop their sword, and the sword is now at the top of the hill and they're now at the bottom of the hill. So yeah, a lot of different ways you can go there. Definitely nice to mix things up and give the characters options. And even when you don't give them a lot of options, you'll notice that they will make their own options a lot of times. So
an environment constitutes a lot of things. There's not just the ground, but you've got visibility. So an encounter in fog, for instance, can simply that's environment too, or an encounter in the pouring rain, or encounter underwater. That's all to me falls under environment. And then you can also obviously incorporate cover and things like that in there. So there's a lot of little levers to pull in that. When you're environment. So I think that's really great.
And give them an environment they wouldn't normally think of as an environment. And one of the other encounters that I'd done for a while ago. So I had in open ocean, you've got these mats of flotsam and jetsam, just a bunch of debris, driftwood, dead kelp and all that, just all accumulated and everything. So I got one of those, and there's your typical sea hag that looks like an elf maiden shipwreck victim hanging out in there. The ship comes up, investigates it, and as it turns out, it's sea hag instead of your elven maiden, if you will. But to kind of give them a much more diverse environment is it's not a pile of flotsam that they're on. It's actually a slumbering dragon turtle. And she's actually working with the dragon turtle, the hag. And it's asleep though right now. So at the beginning of the encounter, it's just you're climbing around having a battle with a sea hag. But then, while, especially if you let off a lightning bolt or something like that, the entire environment wakes up. And then, now all of a sudden you're on the back of a dragon turtle fighting a creature that can kill you with its sight. And water all around, and then here comes the steam breath. So yeah, it's just bringing it, making it as dynamic as possible, and really making people think, wow, now I've got the sea hag to contend with, I've got water to contend with, now I actually have the ground we're standing on to contend with, and that makes for a memorable encounter.
And possibly another combatant, because that kind of goes into the whole mixing creatures together,
Yes.
Because you've got the sea hag and the dragon turtles, so now you've got two opponents, and I'm a big proponent of that, of mixing creatures when you can get away with it. That makes sense. I think that makes things more complicated. It fits into the tactic thing, because if you have different levels of creature or different types of creature, they can employ different tactics in combination. Because certainly if you look at the original books, or modules, ventures, for instance. Like I think of the natives that attacked at the beginning of Isle of the Ape. I think of the bandit, sort of ruined bandit tower that was in the upper ruins of the Temple of Elemental Evil. Gygax laid out a very complicated bandit encounter, different weapons, and they were going to do this, and they used visibility by hanging dark cloth and doing certain things to the entire interior of this tower to make things to their advantage, and it made for a really cool encounter. So I think mixing things in that way, or like you said, taking what was like a level 1 encounter, if you will, of just the sea hag, and now stepping up the game.
Yep.
Because again, I've done that. I once had an encounter where the players ran down the road and ran into your typical humanoids, goblins or something, and had a fight on the road. And I think we've all done that. The goblin stage in ambush, on the travelers. But then they let off some spells and some things, and then that kind of attracted an ant hag came out from the ground and started attacking, and like a pair of them, these insects burst up from the ground, and one of them even seized one of the goblins, So now all of a sudden they've got to face these acid spitting creatures. And then I even kind of almost took it one level further to the level of absurdity where, a round or two after that, I had a boulet was attracted by the ant hags drilling around. And the poor players, and again, though, the players really had a good time with it. They just went with the flow, God bless them. And, they kind of, but, what started with the goblins, before the goblins were completely all gone, led into the giant insects. And then before the giant insects were all gone, a boulet was stampeding through, through this kind of like the, whatever it was, episode 2 of Star Wars, in that arena with that thing running around. And it was sort of, it made for a very chaotic, fun encounter. And again, like, levels beyond what just a goblin encounter, 5 goblins or something would have been. So yeah, I think that's the way to go. I agree with you.
Excellent. Great. All right. Well, let's jump into a top 10 list, shall we? Yeah. All right. Would you like to go first? You want me to go first?
Yeah, I'll dive in. Why not?
Okay. All right.
It's fun for me hearing your picks. So I'm kind of looking forward to what you're going to throw up there. For my number 10, and again, these are our top 10 underutilized monsters. So kind of like the coolest monsters you've never used. So not just monsters we think are cool, monsters we think, could have some utility at the table. My number 10 would be the Rakshasa. I think the idea of them is really cool. The write-up of them, I haven't even used them that much, but when you read them, they're described as sort of spirits and human, in another form, and masters of illusion. They have ESP abilities, illusionary abilities. So there's a lot of, masters of intrigue sort of stuff going on there. They can use magic and cleric spells. And they're incredibly tough. If you read and they are like a 7 or 8 hit die creature, but if you look at the write-up, they're actually immune to spells under 8th level, which is
like everything.
Unbelievably. I mean, basically takes clerics off the board right there. And you don't even get like an 8th level spell in first edition until you're like 15th or 16th level as a mage. So, like I almost, when I did a double take when I kind of reread that. But anyway, I think the Rakshasa, I think you could have them, plotting things and being puppet masters and maybe working with other creatures, or undead or something. I think there's a lot of stuff that could be going on there. I think, they could play a role as some sort of mastermind, or in an urban campaign, be the force behind the scenes, of a guild, or, machinations going on in the city. I think there's utility there. So that is my number 10 pick, is the Rakshasa.
Couldn't you kill him with a blessed crossbow bolt or something like that? Wasn't there something in there? Like, it was like some silly. So like, immune to all spells, but
and Gygax
put a first level.
He was big on saying like, this creature is immune to this, that, and the other thing, but an exorcism spell will kill it. He was kind of big. And you're right. I think they said like a blessed crossbow bolt would take them out.
But that was it. No other rules on that.
No, it kind of really played to players just trying stuff, saying, I'll just take this holy water and see what it does, Again, a little different than now, where players are more used to what works.
Certainly.
But yeah, that's my number 10.
All right. Well, my number 10, all right, so this is gonna, people are gonna already, I can hear the hate mail coming. So my number 10 is the Nixie. Okay.
Ah,
I am a huge fan of obviously aquatics. I've been down this road. Obviously, everybody knows me, that, that fact that I used to be an aquatic biologist, still deep in my heart.
mhm,
So I love adventures that feature water.
mhm.
And I just felt like the Nixie, is, it's got like 1 to 4 hit points or 1 to 6 hit points, and doesn't seem all powerful. However, I mean, so first, they're not often used. You got the aquatic setting in there, but they actually had some decent magic resistance. They
Mhm.
could summon freaking giant fish, a giant gar or a giant pike. I mean, it's like bigger than a shark. Okay.
Yeah,
They could summon a fish swarm too. Now it's kind of ironic. They could summon like 10 to 100 fish, but like they never told you what those fish do or anything. Like they just summon them. It's like, well, what is 10 to 100 fish come? Is that just dinner? What is that?
yeah,
So I used to have it that the fish would be like a shield, like a fish shield kind of thing. And if
yeah,
you had a shimmering fish, then it would like dazzle you and whatever. So you could do a lot of different things with that. They
yeah.
could charm you, and that was powerful. And it was like a really powerful charm. It took 10 Nixies, but you had like a -2 in your save, and if you failed that save, you were pretty much done. You were pretty much captured for like a year or whatever. And every day they would cast a water breathing on you, and basically do their bidding. And yeah, it was kind of a ham-fisted way where you could, instead of casting a Giaz or a quest spell, you could kind of like have Nixies kind of charm the whole party and have them go, all right, now go fight the goblins or whatever, because we don't want to leave the water and do that. So my number 10 is Nixie. Nixie's
Nice.
aquatic fae. So
I approve. I think that's a good. I have no hate mail for you. I think that's a good pick. All right, going to my number 9, and I do realize now that I'm kind of thinking over my list that I do have a lot of incredibly deadly creatures on here. So that part of the reason they're not used as frequently, perhaps. My number 9 would be the Groaning Spirit. I
Okay,
think in first edition terms, the Groaning Spirit is like an undead that doesn't get a lot of play. But I think
I would
it's,
agree.
and there is one in the Temple of Elemental Evil, if I recall, but you don't see them too much. And I don't know. I think there's an interesting kind of backstory there because they specifically tell you that the groaning spirit, basically has to come from a female elf. So you have to have, a female elf that has either come to an untimely end or that was evil and has risen as undead. So that right there has got a built-in story to it. So rather than just a random skeleton or ghoul or random body that's been brought back from the dead, you almost have like a weird built-in story there or a tragic story there. So I like that sort of gothic background nature to the groaning spirit, and I have barely seen them used. So I feel like, and again, I do acknowledge can be a very deadly creature, no two ways about it, because they can easily slay on unwary adventurers. But that is my pick for number 9. I think
All
deadly
right.
but gothic, the groaning
I
spirit.
like it. I like it. I gave some consideration to that. Gave some consideration to it. My number 9, a little bit strange. The Slithering Tracker. So this
Ooh.
is this is one that really hasn't imported to the later editions. There's probably a reason for it. In the original Monster Manual, there was no picture of it, so that kind of makes it hard to figure out what it is. It was an ooze, and it was difficult to see, so that was probably part of it. But it was like you wouldn't know it was there. It knew you were there. And then when you stopped and rested for a while, the slithering tracker would sneak up and basically start flowing over you, slither over you, if you will, smother you. And you would have to make a save versus paralyzation. And if you failed that save, you were dead. Basically, it would flow over you and kill you. Doesn't matter if you're 20th level, first level, whatever. Like that was it. Like again, you were just paralyzed, and then in 6 turns, you were dead. The rule book says it kills you in 6 turns, which is 1 hour. So deadly, certainly not often used. I think a lot of times definitely I remember being when I was a game master back in the 80s, I was like, wow, I don't even know how to even begin to run this outside of just saying roll a die 20, depending on what you roll, your character lives or dies, basically. And this in this modern age, probably not the coolest way to run an encounter, So probably this day and age, every for that hour, every 6 seconds you'd get to redo your saving throw, and most likely you would come out of it you wouldn't die, and the slithering tracker would never eat. So,
Wow.
so my number 9, the slithering tracker.
Oh, deadly but good. All right, I'm going to keep the deadly vein going. My number 8 pick is the Caterpillar.
Oh yeah,
I found a lot of people might find the original illustrations of them comical or whatever, but I just found the illustrations very cool. The description of how hideous the thing was, and that other creatures can't bear the sight of it. I thought was very cool. It does have a basis in mythology. The sort of snake-like tail that can swiftly strike you, I don't think that came from mythology. So, but the long head and the deathly gaze did. So that's an example of like a creature to me that was really great because it was taken from mythology and then they added that little extra detail on there and gave it like a sort of another attack form. So it can stun you with the tail, or if you're terribly unlucky, it can get that head around and basically just kind of stare you to death. But yeah, I think rarely used. I've certainly never encountered them as a player, and I made a point of recently putting one in a product I wrote for Goodman Games for an encounter I wrote in a product, which I will not mention. I'll let it come up when it comes up. But because I thought I put in a juvenile version of the creature in that encounter, because I just thought this poor creature needs some press. It needs some use. So yeah, again, a version of a creature that is totally weird and based on mythology, and yet somehow I can still plausibly imagine it existing. So I think it's an underused creature, and yeah, that's my number 8 pick is the Caterpillar.
okay. All right, my number 8 pick is right off the bat hard to pronounce. It's the Ixit I think I
Yeah,
said that right, sort of.
yeah.
Zet
I think that's kind of how
Zetchitl.
gotta go with the Mayan
Yeah,
pronunciation.
somewhere in there. It's a bunch of vowels that way too
Yeah.
many vowels and a couple of other letters in there. So I think part of the reason this manta ray / humanoid was not used much is again aquatic, and this is all aquatic. Like these guys are like down in the ocean down below. You're not going to really run into them in a swamp or something like or like where you're going to run into a Nixie. And I honestly think the fact that their name was hard to pronounce was probably another reason why they weren't used. And when they were used in the classic Night Below box set by Carl Sargent, they actually renamed them the Ixzen. Basically, they're the same thing though. They're like a quote unquote freshwater version, Underdark version, but it was essentially the same monster. But they were like, oh, we got to make the name a lot easier. But they're fascinating again, and much like we're talking about the Kuo-toa, they're fascinating that there was clerics, there was vampire versions. The vampires could regenerate, they could energy drain. They weren't necessarily undead. It wasn't really clear, but they had a bunch of cool abilities, and they had a bunch of different like higher levels and that. So they were definitely not utilized. I know that Underdark campaign setting utilized that version of them. Outside that, I remember I've always been fascinated with them. I actually put a whole bunch of them in actually the last 2 Aura books that I wrote. I've actually they were actually in Temple of Elemental Evil in one of the nodes, the water node. Figure that out. But I also went and created an entire community of them for one of the additional encounters in Isle of Dread because I love them so much, and they don't get much love and appreciation.
No,
So that was my number 8, the Manta dudes.
I approve. Good pick. And I can see you using them. Absolutely. My number 7 pick, and I'm going to pronounce it the way I pronounce it, is the Remoraz, or the Remor,
Okay.
as some people say. To me, the picture I love the picture of this creature. I think it's totally cool. I like the sort of ecology or the way they describe the creature having these sort of little wings that it beats to raise the upper half of its body so it can strike. I think that's just such a cool little weird feature that, again, it almost comes off as real because it's so weird. And certainly you're limited more to Arctic environments with these creatures, but they can swallow you. They have, a super heated back that can melt weapons. So there's a lot going on there. and I don't see them getting a lot of love. They did appear in the classic Giant series. Certainly in the Glacial Rift, there was a dome with a Remoraz in it. So I was so happy to see that, because I think they were one of the first creatures in the Monster Manual as a kid when I was flipping through it, and I saw the picture. And I was like, "Whoa, what's that?" Kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, it's everybody's little, dune worm or purple worm or their favorite worm creature. For me, that's mine. So that is probably my, a solid number 7 pick for me. And one other thing that comes to mind that I also thought of just now too is it has a really wide hit die spread, so that makes it
Yep.
a little versatile too. In that the hit die spread for the Remoraz is like from like I think 7 to 14 or 7 to 15. It's got like a really wide spread, so you can comfortably use it for kind of mid to high level encounters anywhere in there, anywhere in that sweet spot. Um, and a lot of creatures don't have that big a hit die variance if you go by the book, so that gives it a little play. You don't have to wait until the characters are super high level for them to encounter it. So when they're romping off through the Arctic looking for those, those the giants or whatever, it's a great tough encounter to throw at them. So that is my number 7
Awesome. Excellent. I agree. I approve.
pick.
My number 7 doesn't get any more iconic than this. Well, maybe it does lower down on the list, but the Beholder. And this is the monster that kind of started this whole conversation off on this. A high level, iconic, lots of different variations. Heck, there's even an aquatic version. I thought about going Eye of the Deep. The Eye of the Deep just not as cool though.
Hmm.
But really, I'll be honest with you. In all of my years of gaming, I think I've encountered a beholder once, and I think I ran an encounter with a beholder once, and
Okay.
that's in almost 40 years of gaming.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. They're complicated. I mean,
Yeah.
they have 11 eye attacks,
Yeah.
okay, but like you have to. It only depends on which way they're facing. So there's these firing arcs. So
Yeah.
it's actually a disadvantage to try and sneak up on a beholder because then you've got like 4 different eyes facing at you. So that was always kind of scary. They didn't actually have hit dice. They had a hit point range, and then they
Yes.
broke it down as like their body had this many hit points,
Yeah.
their eye stalks
Totally
had
weird.
this, and the main. Whoa, just complicated. And there was this complicated hit system on if you hit this, you didn't hit that, and yeah, it was just I remember being fascinated with them but scared about trying to run an encounter with them. And they hover. So
Yeah.
now you're talking 3D.
Yeah.
So absolutely scary and intimidating
Yeah.
is probably the
Yeah.
best word for it for a game master to try and run an encounter. And it's probably one of those things I need to revisit now after this many years of playing and designing. I probably need to do a proper beholder module or at least encounter that's going to do justice to its abilities and everything. And yeah. So I mean that's my number 7, the Beholder. I know it's a little bit iconic out there, but I
Yeah.
think it's definitely got a lot going on with it.
Definitely. And you're right about the complexity of the combat, because the arcs, and I think they wanted to build in that weird hit point system so you could disable maybe certain stalks by
Yeah.
slicing eye stalk. But it's, I think there was even some confusion as to whether the central eye was the one that did the anti-magic ray, and I think
Yeah.
it does, or it's strongly implied it does, but some people kind of weren't sure. And so yeah, it's
Yeah.
complicated, but it's such cool.
And you can be turned to stone, you can be
Oh yeah.
disintegrated, it was like, yeah,
Yeah, it's
bad things could happen
not
or
not for
not
the
so
meek.
bad.
Yeah, not for the meek.
So
You gotta hope for the telekinesis ray, or whatever.
exactly.
Oh, um, very cool. All right, my number 6 is the Ixit
Oh,
Zetatol. So yeah,
nice. Look
I
at that.
as well, because for many of the same reasons, and I'm not going to echo everything you said, but just briefly, yeah, I think you got a foe that could potentially be organized. As you said, there's different versions. You've got the clerical, wielding spell version. You've got the vampiric ones that sort of drain energy. And they were low level too. So
Hmm.
if your characters weren't strong enough to go up against the Koatoa or the overused Sahuagin, that's like a nice low level yet intelligent and organized foe, because they do make it clear that they're not dumb. They're like average to high intelligence, so they are kind of like, plotters or schemers, or at least have some basis of organization, you would think. Certainly if they have clerics and that kind of stuff. So to me, an interesting underwater enemy that you could use at lower level. So and there aren't a lot of
Excellent.
those. So I think, yeah, that was my number 6 pick. So I
All
also
right.
picked the Ixal Zachitel. So
All right, my number 6. Going back to the Fae again here. Everybody uses nymphs. Everybody uses dryads. Nobody uses the sylph.
no,
Nobody uses the sylph. They probably because they are in remote mountaintops. They're not very. They're not in forests or watery situations like where the nymphs are and everything. So but a couple things, in my opinion, that really make the Sylph stand apart from others. First of all, magic resistance back in the day, 50%. That is huge. 50% of the time, it's not going to be affected by a spell. They were a 7th level spellcaster, and it didn't specify if they were a cleric spellcaster or a magic user spellcaster. So you could probably make it whichever way you want. Could turn invisible at will. At will. So good luck trying to find her to actually land a blow on her. And then to trump it all off, I think she had something like 3 or 4 hit dice overall. Could summon an air elemental.
yeah,
And if you look at the rules, an air elemental summoned by a spell, which you would assume this would be summoned by a spell, had 16 hit dice. So yeah, you weren't getting wrecked by the sylph, but you were going to get wrecked by the air elemental that had 16 hit dice and just overpowered you. So I think the sylph just because no one ever used them, and I don't know why that is exactly, but I've done dryads over the years, run them, encountered them in games, but I don't think I've ever encountered a sylph or used a sylph. So that's my number 6.
you're right. In the world of Fae, they don't get a lot of play, and I don't use the
They
Fae in
don't.
my gaming. In my campaign worlds, I rarely use Fae, so that's something I have to start thinking about. All right, my number 5. I'm going to pick another one that you picked.
Nice.
I picked the Beholder.
All
Um,
right.
and we talked a little bit about this kind of off air before the show. Chris and I talk, because yeah, I think it's I don't know what got me thinking about it a couple years ago, but I started thinking about how iconic the Beholder is, how it's on the cover of books and it's on the front of the monster manual, at least two monster manuals. And it's just such an iconic creature that you're hard pressed to find an experienced D&D player that doesn't know on site what a beholder is. But then if you ask those same players, have you ever DM'd a beholder or encountered a beholder as a player, you get crickets. And I find that really interesting. And again, a very high level creature, very deadly, hard to play, can't game right as a DM. So there are reasons, but it still drove me a little crazy. And a few years more than a few years back, I was running a 4th edition campaign, and it kind of came to a head in my mind, and I decided, damn it, I'm going to use them. And the players were unraveling a big long conspiracy that had several bad guy factions fighting over a very powerful artifact, and I decided that I was going to have the head bad guys be beholders. And when the poor players were only, I think, 3rd or 4th level, I actually had them encounter the beholders, not in a straight out combat situation, but just sort of a guest appearance by the beholders, just sort of showing up briefly, saying a few words, demonstrating their power. So the poor players stumbled across, I think, a very large encampment of, hundreds of goblins that were slain. And there were fires burning and tents were, thrown over, and, a whole encampment of obviously very large encampment of humanoids had been destroyed. And then, the players started doing a little sleuthing, and one of them made some checks and said, well, I want to see how long the bodies have been here. And I told them about 15 minutes. And now all of a sudden they're really nervous because, they're sitting on top of hundreds of corpses of humanoids. And then I had not one, but 2 beholders show up, a sort of senior and junior beholder show up and impart a few words. And then before leaving, as a demonstration of their power, that one of them used a disintegration beam to slice off the cliffside that the characters were standing on. So they teleported away, and now the poor characters had to run and make leaps and things and try to leap off this piece of cliff before it fell into the seaside. And that was kind of like the first time I used the beholders, because I said to myself, I'm going to put these guys in my game. And it's funny because that really started a trend with me where now I'm trying to push almost classic creatures into my game. After that, not too long after that, I used a Hydra because I had never used a Hydra.
Hmm.
I've since used dragons more because for a game called Dungeons and Dragons, I don't use dragons a lot as a DM. And yeah, I've just tried to follow that motto that when plausible, and obviously when the character's up for the fight or up for the challenge of featuring these more iconic creatures, because at the end of the day, we've all done these like humanoid encounters, the goblins on the roadside kind of thing, and it's certainly appropriate for lower level. But at the end of the day, to me, like D&D is about making memories, and the
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
your players are really going to remember. They're going to remember the beholder. They're going to remember the
Oh yeah.
hydras heads was growing, with the hydra where the heads
Yep.
are growing back. But the five goblins on the road, they're probably not going to remember that encounter in 5 years. And so to me, it's more about making
Yeah.
the memories that are going to stick. So that that whole thinking about the beholder really started me down this weird path of trying to use these more, just saying I'm going to find all these creatures that I always have wanted to use since I was a kid in the campaign and start using them. So yeah, that is my number 5, the beholder.
All right. Okay. My number 5 is the Neo Atyug.
Ah,
Okay. Everybody thinks the Atyug is awesome and always gets all sorts of publicity. But no one ever uses the Neo Atyug. And Neo Atyug's basically just a bigger version, more intelligent, never surprised, which is a very useful skill back in first edition AD&D. The ability to not be surprised is actually huge. Its AC was 0, which is really low for a mid-level
yeah.
monster. It had 3 attacks. Ironically, its tentacle attacks did more damage than its cousin, the Atyug, but its bite did less for some
Yes.
reason, and that seemed wrong. That
Yeah.
had to have been a typo. I just like, did somebody not catch that? Like, it's bigger in every other way, yet its bite does less damage. It's like, well, that just doesn't make any sense. So,
And I remember
um,
noticing that too.
yeah,
I was just
yeah,
thinking it was like a weird T-Rex thing, like a bigger mouth and
yeah.
small arms type of situation.
Yeah, exactly. So so I
Weird.
think, and I just think it just doesn't get enough credit.
Mhm.
I mean, it's and the Atyug is such a classic D&D monster. The dung beast, whatever you want to call it. And disease, never underestimate disease. That's gonna always be the game master's friend too, down the road. But yeah, so that's my number 5, Neo Atyug.
Nice. I approve. I always love Audios. I think they're great. Those I use a lot of, many. I don't can't say I've ever used a Neo though, so I am guilty. Guilty
I've
as
not
charged.
either.
Yeah. All right. My number 4 is, I mentioned him earlier, is Lucrata. Um, I love these guys. I don't know why. I think again the art really inspired me. They look kind of badger-like or hyena-like or jackal-like, and I like the look. There's to me some verisimilitude. I think the voice mimicry ability of them opens up some cool encounter ideas where they can employ a little bit of trickery, and that sort of thing. So I think there's some flexibility there. I think also, you can place them in a lot of places. Obviously, they're good in the mountains and the hills, but I think you could easily stretch that and include them in deserts and plains. I think even, you could push that into the forest or underground. So there's kind of, I almost look at them as the DM's friend. You can plop them down in a lot of places. And I also, again, like a lot of the creatures I like, and they are based from myth. One of the things I think is cool is they've got a long history. And like, I think I mentioned earlier, my favorite creatures are the ones where they take them from mythology, and there's usually one little weird detail or something in there, that makes them even more outwardly. And for me, the bony ridge they have in the mouth instead of the teeth, they make a point of saying they've got this horizontal bony ridge in the mouth, and that actually comes from mythology too. As far as I know, the first mention of the Lucrata is in the book Natural History by Pliny the Elder. The natural history is like Pliny wrote many books, but I think natural history is the only one to survive, and it's basically one of the biggest intact books that's sort of works of knowledge that survived the Roman Empire. and he described the Lucrata, including the bony ridges. So I think it's just such a cool detail. I think the only weird detail about the Lucrata that didn't make it into the Monster Manual version for whatever reason is mythological versions had them having a very wide mouth, where they had a mouth that went from ear to ear. And for some reason, that little detail never got in, but the bony ridges did. But in any case, yeah, I think cool creature, very, to me, real in my mind, and steeped in mythology. So I go with the Lucrata for a solid number 4.
Excellent choice. Excellent choice. All right, my number 4. Wow, probably should have been even higher than 4, but this is kind of where after this one my list probably goes off the rails. But my number 4, going back to the sea, the dragon turtle. We already talked about it. Dragon turtles were nasty. Now, I think it was because they were after dragons that they got ignored. Yeah. But if you look at the dragon turtle and just compare it to, let's say, I don't know, a red dragon, it actually comes out on top a fair amount on a lot of the core statistics. It had more hit dice, 12 to 14 hit dice, armor class of 0. Had 3 pretty nasty attacks. Claw, bite. Its bite did 4 to 32 damage. Again, aquatic, but it could be freshwater too. So it could be in lakes or it could be in rivers. All right. And then here's the things that could just, really ruin your day. It could capsize a ship. And I mean, that's, right there, capsize a ship and dump everybody in the water. That's a bad day right there. And potentially destroy the ship. And then it's steam breath, which, oh, by the way, in first edition does damage equal to its hit points. And we've already established that it has more hit dice than a red dragon. Granted, it doesn't get the 8 hit points per, die that an ancient red dragon would, but still, that's a solid number of hit points there and a solid amount of steam damage. So they are just bad. They're just bad creatures, and just overlooked and not utilized. And I think environment is part of it, but I just think that also just they're not a classic dragon. If they were a classic dragon, I think maybe they probably get a little bit more love. But that's my number 4, the dragon turtle.
That's a good pick, and I agree. Yeah, they were always right at the end of the dragon. They were right at the end of the dragon, and the D section of the Monster Manual was always kind of an exhausting section because you always had all the devils, all the demons, all the dinosaurs and all the dragons. So it's kind of like after you chew through most of that, then sandwiched in there somewhere was the poor dragon turtle. And I think he fell into that weird place where the sea lion fell into, but also like you said, I sort of people would see all the earlier dragons and give him short shrift. So I think that's a fantastic pick because dragon turtle is both deadly and interesting. So that's a good pick. My number 3 pick, and this is sort of split pick, forgive me, but I think they sort of fulfill the same function in my games, is the Coatl / Keyren. I picked them because, well, I think a lot of DMs, myself included, when they go to these books, these monster books, tend to just kind of blow past the good creatures, and kind of, keep turning. Don't bother with the divas. Let's get to the good stuff. But I think there's a lot of utility there because certainly either one of these creatures, depending on what power level you're looking for, and both are fairly powerful, they can act as a force of good, either helping the characters or rendering aid or imparting information to the characters or straight out kind of questing the characters to do something or to help. They can, be some sort of driving force of good behind an adventure or incorporated into an adventure. So for that reason, I give kind of a split number 3 to the Coatl and the Keyren because I think they're both cool, powerful, good creatures that could make a good story element if used properly.
Well, that's ironic.
Here it comes.
This is where I go off the rails. I feel my list kind of goes off the rails a little bit. My number 3, I lump them all in there. I could have just picked one. I did have a favorite, but I went with good aligned dragons. Again, the game is called Dungeons and Dragons. I feel that we don't have enough dragons in the game. It's hard. They're really powerful creatures, and they tried to do that in fourth edition where, you know, first level party could take out an adult white dragon, and they could, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel organic.
Yeah.
But I feel the good aligned dragons because there's so much potential there. And again, a lot of what you just said, there's storytelling potential there. The silver dragons and the gold dragons can assume humanoid or even like animal form. So they work as a perfect, you know, patron to the player characters, and they don't even know they're a dragon. They could, you know, your characters could be years and finally, whoa, we're actually working for a dragon, which is cool. You know, they've got that high intelligence, so they're intelligent critter. Obviously, you know, claw, bite, attack routines, wings, tails, the whole 9 yards. Breath weapons, spells. Most of them have spells. You know, the metallic dragons tend to have, you know, back in the first edition, tend to have more spells than better chance of casting spells than the chromatic dragons do. Just a lot of potential there, a lot of storytelling potential there. And then again, not that you should do this often, but you could always throw a corrupted good dragon at a party, have them try and kill them. That's always an interesting turning things on its side. This is what it would really be like to fight a gold dragon that lost its way or was corrupted by an evil artifact or something along those lines. Again, don't want to do that all the time. But certainly along the lines of your number 3, I would say underutilized, certainly powerful, certainly. If I had a favorite, silver dragons have always had a soft spot in my heart. But that would be my number 3, the good aligned dragons.
Yeah, good pick. And you know, it's funny, speaking to the kind of corrupted good dragon thing, I may not get the name of the adventure path right, but you know, Paizo did it in one of their earlier adventure paths called the Age of Worms. They actually had a corrupted silver dragon, a vampiric silver dragon that had, you know, fallen to vampirism, and you know, you felt like it was a good force and then turned out to be evil. And I think that's it's a cool concept, you know. Again, like you said, you don't want to overuse it, but the idea of taking a good dragon and, you know, you never know, once in a while going that direction, I think it's cool. But certainly they have absolute utility just plain being good. So yeah, that's absolute solid pick. All right, number 2. This is where my list starts going off the rails. Number tick, I'm going to get some groans for this one. I'm going to pick the Rust Monster. Because
the Rust Monster, that is one of the most overused monsters ever.
See, I've never encountered one as a player, and I've rarely, no, never.
Oh my gosh.
To me, it's got out. Yeah, all the games I've played in as a player, I've never encountered the thing.
Wow.
So,
wow. Yeah, that's not right, man. That's not right.
Because to me, it's such a no-brainer. So maybe I'm just playing in the wrong, with the wrong DMs, or I gotten lucky. Because yeah, to me, like I have encountered this thing never. So yeah, clearly, I guess I must be in the minority. But to me, it has such DM shutdown utility. But also, frankly, at the lower levels or the low to mid levels, you do have to be careful as a DM because you don't want to get over deadly. You don't want to, be beating the character over the head. So in some ways it can be used as a, DM shutting down your ability or taking away your stuff. But to me, it's an alternate attack form to outright killing people. And I do think the creature's got utility because it's a great like pet / watchdog or something that you could mix with other creatures. So I think, instead of just having an ogre with, 1 or 2 rust monsters on a chain suddenly makes a much deeper, more complicated encounter that suddenly,
Did you just say on a chain? Because I think I figured out what your problem is.
That doesn't really, all right, let's go with a rope.
That doesn't work. That doesn't work. Yeah, I can see what the problem is.
Yeah. we'll go with a nice thick rope then of twine. But, basically, something like that, where you're mixing them with other creatures. I think there's possibilities there.
Wow.
So
okay.
That's my admittedly controversial number 2.
Yeah, I would say yes, controversial. Yes, I would agree with that. Wow, that's okay. Wow. It's funny. I went into this list and I was like, yeah, well, I know something I'm not putting on the list, and that's Rust.
Wow.
So yeah, okay. Wow. I'm stunned here. All right, my number 2. My list is looking a lot better now.
That's
my number 2 is also kind of a category of monsters, which is kind of cheating a little bit, but I don't know. You can do it when you're making up the list. You can make up your own rules.
Yeah.
So I'm going with the Sphinx. Obviously, Sphinx, lots of different flavors there. You got a couple that are just straight out combatants. But you get into the Andro Sphinx and the Gyno Sphinx, Gino Sphinx, whatever you want to call it, the female one. A lot of interesting things to unpack there. Obviously, very high intelligence for those other two. Very powerful attacks, very low armor class. Now, obviously, it's storytelling. These are monsters that are typically used more for storytelling. Obviously, you've got the whole riddle angle. I think that scares people. I think that scares game masters. It also kind of puts off players too, I would say. Was probably more of a thing back in first edition. I think it's less of a thing now. But the Andro Sphinx had this crazy roar ability that it would roar 3 times, and at each time that it roared, it got like more powerful, which was fascinating and debilitating at the same time, and it could cast spells. But the female Sphinx, in addition to a pretty decent selection of innate spell abilities, could also this is mind-boggling actually, because this is something I think that I don't know if this was pulled from mythology. It probably was, but this was one of those things I think that whoever designed the Sphinx for AD&D didn't think things all the way through. But she could cast each symbol spell once per week.
Wow.
And there's 8 different symbol spells. One of them, symbol of death,
and they're powerful.
And they're very powerful. They're 7th level spells, and they don't go away until they're triggered. So literally, she has sentries just to cover every 5-foot square of her lair, ceiling, walls with symbol spells. Which is just, you could be dead before you ever get to her. You might not even know you're going up against a Sphinx because you'll never get past all the hundreds of symbol spells that are out there. So crazy, yes. But that was one of those things where it sounded good, and probably was never play tested. Because play testing we'll get to a whole play testing episode actually. But that play testing, something like that, we'll figure out. Oh my God, that's a little too powerful right there. But that was what really took that. And I don't think, again, if you look at it from the storytelling standpoint, I think that's where your gravy is with the Sphinxes. I mean, again, you can do some straight combats with them as well. And if you've ever played the Sphinx Queen adventure by Goodman Games, the 3rd edition one. Great twisting of sticking things on its ear to actually face Sphinx in combat and whatnot, and did a really nice job with it. So
that was a really good. That Goodman Games adventure was really good.
So that was my number 2, Sphinxes in general.
Interesting.
All right.
Very powerful, like you said, except for maybe, the Hyraska Sphinx always came off as the redheaded stepchild of the Sphinx family, I think.
Very much so, yeah. I think it was just there for completeness.
We'll throw this ripping like one in there, but the other guys were, the Andro and the I'm going to say the Gyno Sphinx were very powerful. So interesting. I think if DMs push themselves to use them beyond the riddle thing, not just have that be the end all be all, but use them beyond that and play their intelligence, I think they could absolutely be used to make really cool encounters. And my number 1 pick, again going off the rails, so I'm going to be interested to see how you respond to this.
Well, it can't be as bad as the Rust Monster.
I know, right? That I love the response I got from the Rust Monster. I have to do that again. Number 1 is the Intellect Devourer. Because its beautiful weirdness and alienness, and I'm not going to say this one stinks of verisimilitude because it's totally out there, but it is to me such a dreadful kind of alien creature that I haven't seen used a lot. I love the idea of it clawing you while also psionically attacking you. Again, this was 1st edition, so you had some creatures in there peppered with different psionic abilities. Plus it can actually sort of empty your mind out of your body and inhabit your body. So kind of, before doppelgangers made it fashionable, the, Intellect Devourer can basically take your place, can essentially put its mind within your body and walk around and pretend to be one of the characters and operate in that way until it can prey on another character. So the idea of having this wolf in sheep's clothing potentially within the party. And again, it's hard to play. Anybody who's played doppelgangers understands the whole replace the character thing is easier said than done. But I think there's a lot of stuff there. I think they could be very dangerous, but also a very interesting character. A lot of paranoia and a lot of stuff can be put around an encounter with an intellect devourer. And again, not a creature I ever ran into. I think the only time I ever saw one mentioned was there is one in Expedition of the Barren Peaks, and they make a point of mentioning in the adventure how kind of dangerous it's thought to be. But that's it. That's the only time I think I've seen them used. And again, a creature that's fairly recognized, I think, even by newer players, because maybe it's so weird or the brain-like look or the headless sort of look. But that's my number one. And now if they're number one, but that's my number one is the intellect.
All right. Excellent. All right. You saved yourself on that one. So that was definitely there. I considered that one for my list. I thought that was a little, I wanted to go a little bit off crazy a little bit. So my number one, you actually already mentioned, it is the Kyrin.
Oh, okay.
I never realized how bad these creatures were. Not bad, lawful good, but wow. Oh
yeah.
my gosh. I mean, listen to these numbers. I mean, AC -5, -5. That's huge in first edition. Its horn was +3, magic resistance 90%. It's almost had godlike intelligence. It was an 18th level spellcaster. Oh, and by the way, we're going to give it psionics, and maybe we'll throw on some innate spellcasting just in case, so you don't want to take up any of those spell slots with things like Call Lightning, Windwalk, or Gaseous Form. And then the kicker of this thing too, because again, you're probably never going to get killed by the Kyrin. It's just going to stand there and it's going to summon an elemental. And any elemental that it summons is double the size, which back in first edition, they actually specified this, meant that its hit points were doubled and its damage was doubled.
Wow.
So let's just take the Aerial Servant, for example, which normally has 16 hit dice. That would be now 32 hit dice worth of hit points. And it would do 16 to 64 points of damage on a hit. Wow. So yeah, so again, the Kyrin's not going to be the one that's going to get you. It's going to be something that it's going to, summon for you. So again, lawful good. The storytelling potential is here for this. I've never run into one. I've never used one. I was explaining it to my kid earlier tonight when I was going over my list with him, and he was fascinated by it. He was coming up with his own module that had to do with a corrupted unicorn, and he was complaining that the unicorn wasn't going to be powerful enough for his high level characters that are going up against it. And then he heard the deets on this guy, and he's like, whoa, he's like, I need to check that when I get home.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he fired up the internet, and he checking the deets on this, and I think he's now going to use a Kyrin. So that's going to be something where my kid is going to have more experience with this monster than I am, which is staggering. But yeah, it's mind-boggling how powerful these guys are. And again, makes me want to use one in a module at some point. So that would be my number one. So I know we went very long tonight, folks, with our top 10 lists, but it's just we have lots to talk about with top 10 lists and everything.
All good stuff.
Yeah, definitely all good stuff. So
number one pick. One thing to be said for first edition and Gygas too is they weren't afraid to let the good creatures be powerful. So
not at all. Not at all.
At the Kyrin and you look at the Solars and some of those creatures, they're pretty freaking powerful. So
they are.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just about a wrap before we get to our Pearl of Wisdom. Thanks everyone for tuning in for an extra long show, but it was fun. It was fun. You got to let it go. Our next show is airing on Sunday, October 4th at 10 p.m. So I will hope you will join us then. And if you watched us tonight, please feel free to, if you liked what you saw, give us a follow on Twitch, or if you're watching us later on YouTube, certainly, ring that bell, give us a subscribe or give us a like. We appreciate it. And don't be afraid to leave a comment. We do read all the comments and we appreciate when you folks comment. So let's, we're
definitely
happy to do that. But that said, I guess it's time for the Pearl of Wisdom, eh?
All right. I'll jump in first there. So I'm going to say for my Pearl of Wisdom is you've got the three pillars of 5e adventuring, where you've got exploration, interaction, and combat. So I think the three pillars really of any good encounter, taking it kind of down to the micro level, is the monster, the tactics, and the environment, and altering all of them up to make a really good, memorable encounter. And playing with and maybe tweaking one over here and not tweaking the other, maybe tweaking all three of them, maybe like you said, go to the absurd, add that last little bit, that last little wrinkle that's going to kind of take the encounter to that memorable stage. That would be my pearl of wisdom for this week.
Good pearl of wisdom. My pearl of wisdom is very similar. I kind of riffing on what we said earlier, I would just encourage the DMs out there to, I always encourage DMs to push the boundaries of whatever they've been doing. And, you know, certainly use some of those iconic monsters that you haven't. But that being said, you know, push yourself to combine creatures in interesting ways, because there's a lot of stuff there. Whenever I find myself combining creatures, it's always makes for a better encounter. Yes, it's more paperwork or more creatures to keep track of for the DM, but it's almost always makes a better encounter than just a straight out, you know, single type of creature, because you can have bodyguards and you can have pets and you can have henchmen and you can have all kinds of things going on, and even non sort of intelligent creatures like undead. You know, you can have things like skeletons that are immune to poison that you can combine with another creature or hazard. Like you could have skeletons that have a growth of yellow mold on them, and if they're struck, the poisonous cloud of spores appears, and the skeletons aren't bothered by it because A, they're kind of brainless, and B, they're not affected by poisons. So, you know, things like that. I would encourage the DMs to avail themselves of those combinations, because when you really read the details of the monster descriptions, I think a lot of interesting combos will come to mind. So that is my pearl of wisdom.
That is wonderful wisdom right there. All right. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. With that, we are going to sign off, and we will see everybody about 3 weeks from now.
See you in 3 weeks, folks.
All right. Take care.